Welcome to Peacebuilding Initiatives, where we explore the transformative power of dialogue, cross-cultural understanding, and collective empathy in building more peaceful and connected communities. I'm your host, José Barzola. Thank you for joining us today. In today's episode, we're exploring oral tradition as resistance, preserving identity amid tourism, militarization, and globalization. Our guest is Bella Semens, first year master's student in the political science department at the University of Hawaiʻi at Manoa. Her research focuses on Indigenous politics with particular interest in Indigenous sovereignty, cultural resurgence, and law. She holds a bachelor's degree in justice administration and is especially interested in the intersections of governance and Indigenous self-determination. In this conversation, we'll examine how oral traditions serve as powerful tools for preserving cultural knowledge, language, and identity, particularly within Indigenous and Pacific Islander communities, as forces such as tourism and militarization continue to shape these societies. Storytelling remains a vital means of transmitting values, histories, and lived experiences across generations. We also explore how diaspora communities reconnect with their cultural roots through oral tradition and how these practices continue to function as forms of resistance, resilience, and cultural resurgence. Bella, thank you so much for being here today. It's truly a pleasure to have you here, and I'm really excited about today's conversation. There's just like so many layers of interesting not topics, but also just such keywords that just really like speak to my own lived experience as well. So I look definitely am excited to learn about your lived experience throughout our conversation today. To get us started, might you share what drew you to the study of Indigenous politics and oral traditions?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me here to speak. So from a young age, I was always interested in law and governance. So I also grew up very close to my culture and heritage, thanks to my mom, which is Rafaloash or Carolinian is what they call it. So after completing my undergraduate degree, I knew I wanted to pursue higher education. Political science was always in the back of my mind during my undergrad years. In high school, I was very involved in various clubs and I enjoyed like student council. I liked the collaborative setting and engaging with others and also the organizing aspect of it. And it was especially rewarding to work toward shared goals and see how these efforts positively help others within the community. So, upon researching the political science department at UH Manoa, I noticed that they had an Indigenous politics specialization, which I never heard of before. I'm not too sure, but I don't think any other university has that. And it was a no-brainer. So understanding politics in an Indigenous lens it is very special. So Indigenous people hold the most knowledge of governance and stewardship, in my opinion. So after studying Western concepts and Western frameworks all my life, it kind of felt like coming home, a home that I never really knew existed. And my research interest in oral traditions and history was pretty recent. In my intro to political Indigenous politics class with Kumu Noinoi Silva, um, a lot of our coursework had to deal with Indigenous scholarship, and a lot of her work, she deals a lot with archives and written documents from all over different timelines for Kanaka Maoli. But I was really inspired by the writings and the stories from the Indigenous scholars and members of the community. The archives were written by Native Hawaiians, whether it be from the Nupepa, which is their newspaper, or like personal handwritten letters. I really admired that they um, kept that going, even not in an oral um, medium. So I started to realize that Carolinians, or even the Marianas in general, the Northern Mariana Islands, um, a lot of our written history is in the accounts of settlers and um, colonizers, foreigners, and rarely ever written by the indigenous people of the Marianas. And at first it made me sad, but it led me to realize that the history is preserved through oral history and traditions. So it's not lost, it's just passed differently. Although I personally believe that it would be useful to digitize and write them down, I wanted to focus on the preservation through oral traditions and oral histories, especially in this age of technology and social media. Yeah, just
No, thank you so much. I I love this journey you're going on, and I'm really excited to see how it further develops. Since this is just like your first year of the program. Um, I was wondering if there was a particular moment or experience or story that made you see oral traditions as something more powerful or political in this case, since you are in political science department.
yeah, a lot. So I mentioned I grew up um understanding and understanding the need to preserve the language and culture. So I understand my language fairly well. Um, I don't speak it fluently, which makes me sad. And it kind of scares me, but being away from home and being away from the ancestral land and not around others who actively speak the language makes it all the more difficult. But I believe that just talking story from a young age with like my grandmother who grew up during the World War II time. So she would always talk about her lived experiences through like the Japanese occupation in the Marianas and how they didn't get the same educational opportunities as the Japanese who lived on Saipan. And her experience during the war, so running away from the shootings and the bombings, hiding in the caves, her being one of the eldest daughters, so she would be responsible for her siblings and having that responsibility from a young age. At the time, I would always think like, wow, that's a cool story. But as time went on, I realized that these stories are just so important. They shape the way we live and we see things. And yeah, I think her stories always stuck with me. And I just, you wouldn't find these stories through any history textbook or, um, yeah, just if you look up World War II, these accounts wouldn't always be there. So having this special interaction with her and understanding things from her perspective was just very special.
No, thank you. And I know for folks listening, you referenced the Japanese occupation of Mariana Islands, which I completely, to be honest, like I'm not aware of this part of history. And so thank you so much for bringing awareness to that. And if you want to share more about that, you're welcome to. Otherwise, folks can just go down the research area. I do want to go back though a little bit to you talked about fear, like a fear of not knowing the history, or is that the language?
Um,
Eh,
More of the language, but also I feel like it ties into history as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
and do you want to? Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Like, what is this fear about? I just ask because, I mean, for myself, I was born in Peru. Spanish is my first language. Although I can have a conversational, at one point I felt as though I couldn't have. Um, like I couldn't have an ongoing conversation around like history, literature, the arts in that culture. I don't know if that's similar fear you're talking about, or it's something else specifically.
Yeah, fear of just um not being able to interpret a lot of these oral traditions in history because they are
Mhm.
passed down in my native tongue.
Oh, okay.
I I do want to. I feel like understanding it and speaking it are like very different. So yeah, one day I would love to just build on that muscle.
That reminds me a little bit about, something that I hear folks talk, things are lost in translation. That's Is this what I'm
Yes,
hearing? It's like, yes, we can translate generally or interpret certain. Translation is the wrong word. It's really about interpretation, because every person or AI or whatever method you're using to figure out what's being said in a certain language to understand it in your own language, there's going to be something that's lost in that process, is what I'm hearing.
exactly.
And so being able to be in a space where, yes, I understand. Okay. And it's more than just knowing the words of that language. There's like, once more, historical context that comes into
Hmm.
it. Okay. No, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Um,
Kumu Heoli Osorio, which is she's a professor here at UH Manoa. She has a book called Remembering Our Intimacies, and she talks about how sometimes the translation flattens like complex embodied um words into English or other settler capitalist frameworks. So there are words in my language that I have trouble translating into English, and I feel like sometimes you can only translate it by living it. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's kind of like you would know if you lived that culture and language. Like
yeah.
words like pilina, which is shortened as intimacy. It's often gets misrepresented or um yeah, misrepresented when translated into English.
Yeah, I've always heard Polina as being, what is it, like relationships or
Mhm.
connection. Is that
Yes.
similar, or that's a misconception, is what I'm hearing?
I know it's just sometimes shortened to like that one word, like intimacy. But yeah, it is what you say.
Mm,
Like it's all of that, and
yeah,
it's more than just one word or
yeah.
one sentence. Yeah.
And I've also seen some folks, they will just use the pili and not the full Polina. I don't know if it means two
Right.
separate things, or they're just trying. I don't know. Like most
I
things get shortened.
Yeah, I
So
don't know either. But
okay.
yeah, it's so interesting.
No, no, I completely concur with that. Yeah, there are some things that are lost, not only in the interpretation or translation of it, but also by not having that lived experience. There's
Mhm.
like, it's kind of, it reminds me very much of, like, we may observe a scenery of a family, and we're like, maybe from a Western context, we're like, oh, there's like, the woman's doing everything in the kitchen, the man's just sitting there. And so we might be like, oh, here's a patriarchy alive again, which could be very
Right.
true.
Right.
But maybe there's other layers of, like, maybe this is the one day out of the week where the woman is doing things in the kitchen, or maybe the man takes
Hmm.
over the next day. It's perspective once more. And it's also this, there's, for folks who maybe listening, who are the ones that cook and loved to have people over to feed them. There's this sense of nurturing and love of just having others appreciate your food, which I think as I've gotten older, I've gotten to have that context, as opposed to just having been the person eating the food initially growing up. So yeah, there's a. Oh, thank you. Um, when we understanding, so shifting to understanding oral traditions, when we talk about oral traditions, what does it mean in the context of Indigenous and Pacific Islander communities?
So, oral traditions are often just thought of as old stories, but they're really the heartbeat of the identity and the memory community of Pacific Islander or Indigenous communities. So, people hand them down generation after generation, not just to entertain, but to remind each other who they are and where they come from. For Indigenous communities, I believe it's a way of remembering and living. So these are transmission of knowledge orally by either speaking, singing, or performing.
and many times it's the storytelling, the talk story. And is there a concern that you know, it's kind of like that that game of like, you whisper something to one person and you go around in a circle, and by the 12th person, it's the story has changed. Is
Yeah.
there a concern for that, or that's part of the beauty of the oral tradition?
I believe that's the beauty of it. I
Yeah.
feel like oral traditions and the active passing down of this knowledge, the transmission, um, it adapts to the time and the context of, the way people are living at that time. So as it gets passed down, I feel like people add their own experience, their own thoughts, because of the way that they grew up, and it just kind of, I just think it's the beauty of it.
Yeah, yeah, no, I
Yeah.
completely. It just occurred to me. It's like this living, not to call it a document. It's a living story. It
Yes.
keeps evolving and also keeps being. In my experience with storytelling, I find that it's one thing to have something written in a book and like, oh, whenever someone gets to it, well, they'll learn about that story in that book,
Right.
as opposed to sharing that story orally and for people to interpret that and take it in, and then they share it I feel like it's more alive in that capacity. It's almost like the
It
art of
is.
oral tradition is a life in itself, I
It
guess,
is, yes.
which is kind of remarkable and exciting in itself.
Yeah.
So shifting to, well, um, so this kind of goes on like how it differs from historical written history, but how do oral traditions, would you say, carry cultural values, knowledge that might not exist in written archives?
Yeah. I think just the practice of transferring this knowledge itself is um powerful and separates itself from written knowledge and history. You're making this face-to-face meaningful interaction. It kind of forces you to focus on the conversation at hand. When you're writing, you can kind of ponder your thoughts or your reactions, but I feel like it's not more authentic, but it feels more alive, I guess, what the word we were using. They're sacred in the way that a lot of times this knowledge is not for everyone. So only people in within these communities, unless they choose to share, they understand and are familiar with it. And oftentimes this knowledge is also passed down in the indigenous languages. So they hold the power to access this information and no one can take that away from them. You can't, you can like burn a book, you can tear a page, um, if you digitize it, the website can crash. They can, I don't know, it can,
Yes,
something can happen, but
yes.
orally, they can't take that away from you. Yeah. I don't know if I answered that question. I feel
No,
like
no,
I went
no,
off.
no. No, thank you. And it just occurred to me that something you said earlier. As these oral traditions get passed generations, you adapt it, right, to the times. You adapt it to, because the language evolves, and uh, and that's the beauty of it being so alive. Because I think about like, oh, if I were to read a written history from that was written maybe like 100 years ago, there are some words which I would be like, I don't know what that means, like, because
Right.
they're not in common use anymore, or maybe the word has evolved and we use it in different contexts now. So it's once more it goes back to it's kind of, yeah, really beautiful how it's just uh, alive and keeps evolving,
Yeah.
and thank you. And in what ways would you say that oral traditions carry not just stories, but maybe insights into like governance systems or ethics, ways of knowing? Have you encountered that?
Yes. Yes, so many. So these oral traditions, they encode political structures and even authority. So instead of written laws, governance is kind of remembered and transmitted through narrative or chant. So they sometimes serve as ethical guides for Indigenous peoples. They can teach values such as the Kanaka with Kuleana and love for the Aina. There's so many stories tied to specific places to encode this information and contextualize it. So it creates a relational way of knowing where the humans are part of, not separated from the environment. One of the legends that comes to mind is a tale in the Carolinian culture, which is called the cooling, which is a sandpiper bird. It's a cautionary tale about respect and survival. So there was this cooling bird that was thought to be a bird, but very Carolinians, for context, are very spiritual. We respect spirits. I don't know how to explain, but this bird was a very strong spirit, a powerful spirit, or like a ghost. So it went around and ate all the people in its path who wouldn't feed it. So it went throughout Micronesia, all the islands, Marshall Islands, Pohnpei, and then it got to an island in the outer Caroline Islands called Pulap. And when it got to Pulap, um, it demanded that it be fed, and if it was not full, it would eat all the inhabitants. And the chief of Pulap and his daughter agreed and offered the cooling taro and coconut to avoid dying. The cooling was full, and from this, he had leftovers. So in return, the cooling taught the chief's daughter navigation. Um, they sent it off with ample taro and coconut, and the chief kind of used this as a tactic to kill the cooling. So they overloaded the cooling. It had to carry all of this taro and coconut. And so as it went over the water, oh yeah, as it went over the water, it fell and went down deep into the ocean, but it transformed into an octopus. And so the navigators, navigating and wayfinding is also really important in Satwal for Carolinians. But it it caused the navigators to have this constant protection when they go off into the waters. And it also kind of instilled that, what do I say? Sorry. So women, it's Caribbeans have a matriarchal society, so land is passed down with the women. Um, and so the chief's daughter was the first navigator of these islands, so or of this island. And so it just kind of emphasizes the importance and the authority that women have. Authority is not the right word, but um, yeah, and it highlights just um being open to visitors and treating them well, but also thinking about yourself, being careful, just being cautious. Yeah,
No, I love that. It's maybe if it's not authority, it's like respect. It's just kind of like the common um, lesson of do unto others as you would like to, the golden rule, as they say, treat others as you like to be treated. Um,
exactly.
and no, I love that. And I just, it occurred to me that for folks listening, in case when you say Carolinians, we are referring to uh, people from the Caroline Islands, which are in the Pacifics. I didn't want
Yes.
folks to think like South or North Carolinians, which
Yes.
wants more perspective. I'm just trying to
Sorry, I'm
provide that.
throwing a lot
All
of
good. No,
information.
no, I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
But that's why I'm just making a little note. That's all. Um, so shifting to we in the introduction, I talked about oral tradition as resistance. The title frames oral traditions as resistance, and trying to unpack what that means. In what ways has oral tradition historically functioned as a form of resistance for Indigenous communities, would you say?
I think reclaiming history is one of the things that oral history and traditions is aided with. It helps counter colonial narratives that seek to erase the Indigenous voice. Um, So, for example, oral history and testimonies have been used in legal proceedings to protect indigenous sacred lands, such as Kaho'olawe, from further destruction from the military, but also to reclaim the rights to manage land based on traditional practices. Um, so, another big example I see is the suppression of the Hawaiian language from Hawaiians um, by the United States during the overthrow days. So Hawaiians were forced into not speaking their native tongue, and it led to a decline of cultural transmission. I believe they also couldn't dance hula for a period of time. However, the family still continued to pass down mo'olelo, which is stories, chants, songs. While they had to write and read in English, especially in school, they continued to preserve their ways of understanding, um, like their ancestry and governance. Another example, which I'll probably mention later, is how Polynesian wayfinding techniques were lost for a bit due to European and Western contact. Um, and only a handful of master navigators existed at that time before one came forward and decided to share that knowledge, which he's named Malpiailut, which is a master navigator from the island of Satawal in the Caroline Islands as well. Um, and so the revival of wayfinding in Polynesia wouldn't have been possible without this connection and this lived experience from Papa Mau. So when he agreed to help for the Hokulea, the Polynesian voyaging canoe, he shared his wayfinding techniques. And he doesn't have a book for it. There's no manual on how to be a master navigator. You have to live it. You have to experience that. He has to be there to talk you through it. And yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Now, I could definitely see how, yeah, with colonization and just all of the looking at history with, as civilizations build up and they have capitalism. And so the oral traditions can be so key to keeping that, just as they say, just by existing is a form of resistance, basically.
Mhm.
Um, and might you share examples about how oral traditions actively challenge dominant narratives? Because I find that many times written stories, once more, it's one perspective, and many times it's the perspective of the colonizer that's provided there. Um, yeah,
Right.
just love your insights on this.
Yeah. Um, One thing I think about is in Aotearoa, the Maori oral traditions of their genealogy and stories. They're used directly to challenge colonial land claims. So British legal systems, they often rely on written deeds, um, but Maori communities, they present their oral histories to assert their relationship to the land. Um, and another thing because I just was learning about this in my class with Kumu Noelani Goodyear Kaupua about the Mauna Kea TMT protests. They often, the media often skewed the, no, that's not word. They skewed the information and they portrayed the protesters as being like aggressive. And I know at one point we saw a video of one of the news presses. I know it's on YouTube, but they filmed the door with a dent in it, and the media said it was, or the news outlet said it was a bullet, and they're like, oh yeah, they're fighting back. They shot a gun or something. And Kumu Noi, she explained it. It wasn't through the news video that I understood, but she explained that it was actually um, from the door. So when they would slam the door open, it would hit against that wall. And so it created this dent that fits perfectly with the door handle. So there was nothing violent about it, but the media kind of made it that way. And I thought about it, and I wouldn't have known that if it weren't for my kumu telling that story, because she was actually there. She lived that experience. Um, yeah, I think that's just the narratives that the media creates as well as another thing. So yeah, I think it's really important to share these experiences and have these connections with each other.
No, I agree. And as I recall, when, you know, the Mauna Kea was on the news a lot. I forget how many years ago it was now. Five, no, maybe 7, 8 years ago now. Um, I remember it was very selective. Selective storytelling is what was happening from the media. Um, and one thing that came to light, I think it was maybe Syl Beat that brought it to light, that places like, uh, like Star Advertiser, to call them out, uh, they would be very, very selective as to what they reported because, as it turns out, if you follow the money trail and who owns what, the folks that were in charge or owned the 30 Miller telescope that they wanted to build was also owned Star Advertiser. So you don't want your entities, your family, whatever you want to call it, things you own, to be reporting negatively around your other businesses. And
Right.
so yeah, and so for someone who's like, oh, I only get my news from this one space, well, it's creating a certain, collective hive mindset. And I think that's part of, not to trickle off to what's currently happening in this nation, and just, being conscientious of like everything you hear, listen, read, it's going to be one specific perspective. So being able to be in spaces where you can get these firsthand experiences, such as your Kuma was able to provide, is ever so essential. So yeah, thank you. I'm glad that was brought up. Um,
Mhm.
so when it comes to, you know, another part of our title is about tourism, militarization, globalization. How do forces such as militarization, globalization, and tourism affect the transmission of storytelling practices?
Yeah, a lot to unpack with that one,
Yeah.
but so militarization specifically, it leads to land dispossession, the restricted access for indigenous communities, and ultimately cultural fragmentation. It can silence these indigenous voices. In Guam, they have a heavy military presence. So, for those who don't know, the US Navy had control of the island at one point. US President McKinley ordered that the entire island be a naval station. So, they had full access to this island, and we're still seeing the effects and the aftermath of that now. Um, as a result, sacred sites and ancestral land were taken for bases. So there's really limited access to places where stories could be told and contextualized. So when we also talk about living, oral tradition and history being living, oftentimes we are told these stories at the actual place that it had occurred. So to not have this context while the story is going on, I mean, you could be talking about Makua Valley which the military also occupies, and talk about the green grass and the um, all the history of it while it's being used for um, military training. So it's hard to imagine that, especially with younger generations not have ex having experienced that. Um, Globalization ultimately leads to cultural homogenization. So one of the visible examples I see is a global spread of Western norms, um, including the media and, of course, consumer goods. That's a whole other topic, but English has become a central language in many of the indigenous places. So in some, it's kind of thought to be the ultimate goal. The more English you know, the more educated you are. We get used to Western norms and start to neglect the traditional ways of life because we found an easier way or whatever the case may be. So these narratives are set to ultimately harm us. Um, while tourism can aid in cultural continuity, they can enforce more cultural experiences. They want to watch hula, they want to attend luau's. So that helps us reinforce culture and language in some way, but it also has some negative impacts, which one is authenticity. Many oral traditions can be altered to appeal to visitors. So these songs or chants, whatever the case may be, can be shortened, modified, even changed in some way to appeal to tourists. So this results in changes or confusion within that transmission. Um, yeah, that's just some of it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You're right. I mean, I was just reflecting upon what you just said as far as at the end of the day, especially with tourism, it's about like how can we edit something or make it more appealing so that everyone enjoys their experience. And at the bottom line is that there's money to be made. Um,
Exactly.
so anything that might perpetuate a perspective that might not might make maybe the tourists feel uncomfortable, but would probably not
Hmm.
be adequately provided up front, unfortunately. So I could see, and once more, that kind of leads to maybe like cultural commodification, or there's a loss
Hmm.
in the oral tradition, and so how do communities navigate these tensions between economic realities and cultural preservation, would you say? But do you have suggestions?
Oh yeah. This one's difficult, but I see it as communities constantly trying to find that balance between sustaining their livelihoods while also protecting the integrity of their cultural practices. Because I know many indigenous peoples from everywhere, they do depend on tourism. Um, to make money or just to survive too. Um, I feel like they can just an idea is they can choose what part of their culture they want to share and which parts they want to protect. I know a lot of information is sacred and important and should only be for them. They can perform certain songs or dances publicly while also keeping the more sacred ones private. So it allows them to participate in the economy without fully exposing the sacredness of their traditions. I see a lot of um, locals, I'm speaking just from my point of view in living in Hawaii, but posting pressing issues in Hawaii to social media, such as the recent floods. It allows people who are potentially visiting to understand what they're coming into, and it lets them know that there are people who are actively suffering, and what places to stay away from, and what small businesses to support. But I think there should be a push for more educational activities, like the Bishop Museum or Iolani Palace. The communities can run cultural centers and tours to ensure that there's historical accuracy from Indigenous perspectives. And yeah, there's just some.
Thank you. Shifting a little bit to uh, being part of the diaspora, uh, for diaspora communities who did not grow up on the islands, how do you see oral traditions help rebuild connections to their culture and identity? And for those living away from their ancestral lands, how does storytelling support that reconnecting and belonging?
Yeah, I feel like it's one of I feel like it's the main way that we keep rebuilding these connections to our culture and identity. So, my experience in the diaspora moving to Hawaii, it's the only other place I've lived. And music has been one of the most fundamental and longest forms of communications in my culture, particularly. So women chant or sing while cooking or cleaning. Men use it when navigating or hunting. So there's always some sort of song or chant relating to their task. And so when I moved here, I listened to a lot of music from back home. They tell story, they tell these stories in the lyrics and in the music, but also remembering where I heard this song and what the song reminds me of. Like my family had barbecues and always played this song, or my grandma always played this song. It always brings me back and it keeps me grounded. I feel like it's very special to have that bridge to kind of like tap back in and remember why I came here, where I came from. It's hard to get lost when you're out here and having all these new experiences and influences. But yeah, I feel like oral traditions and history is one of the biggest ways that we keep these connections to our ancestral lands.
Thank you. Are there unique challenges that diaspora communities face when trying to access or preserve these traditions? I don't know if there's like a nowadays everything's online, but even then, yeah, what would be if someone's listening who is part of the diaspora community, if there's any guidance on where they should look?
Yeah, there are some challenges. I know there's a significance of like face-to-face interactions when transmitting knowledge, and there's not always a chance for this to happen in the diaspora, um, because a lot of times the youth like move to another place and there's no elder to pass this knowledge down. But a lot of, not a lot, but many oral traditions and history can be found on online archives. Um, when I did some research last semester, I found a lot on the Marshall Islands community. They had a whole, sorry, I don't have the website, but they had a whole photo archive and there were various traditions posted, music, songs. Um, and I can speak for my experience. I would use YouTube. There's the Northern Marianas Humanities Council, and they would always post their podcasts. And I didn't know that these existed, but I feel like YouTube, since it's been around for a while, it has a good amount of information, especially when it comes to music and performance. But I know it's hard. Not everyone knows where to look or what they're looking for. Um, so I think, yeah, for myself, I go to YouTube. Oh, actually, the UH Manoa online library database, they have a section for um, films and videos. And if you put in Micronesia or Polynesia, your island, whatever it may be, they have a pretty big source of archives for the Pacific.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I think that's, I mean, although people talk about the challenges with like social platforms or and AI and things being fake, I will say that I also find that it provides it provides accessibility for people to have a voice who never past generations back would have had to like, oh, I need like an agent to be able to get published or to have something recorded. And so the technology has made it so folks can share. Um, and it probably is a needle in a haystack, but it's out there if you're truly intent in searching. And I think
Mhm.
also, I'm just thinking, working backwards, I imagine if someone is listening and they want to learn more about oral traditions, first off, I would start with like talk to your family. Um, and if that's not a possibility, then there's a lot online. There's also I know that in academia itself, faculty are more than happy to get those type of inquiries of like, hey, I'm really looking to learn more about such and such community, or obviously give some context if it's part of your um, ancestry, and yeah, I mean, if especially if they have research expertise in this area, they're more than happy to provide guidance in that. So
Yeah. We see the importance of like having these relationships and
yeah,
talking to people and yeah. Um, I feel like people might find it harder to do that now, funny enough, since even though we have social media. Um, but I feel like, yeah, just take that chance and like make that connection, ask those questions because it's really all we have.
yeah. The way I look at it, it's like what was it, the white pages or yellow pages? I forget back in the day. But people could, you could technically go through that and call someone. Like the phone number was there, and
Mhm.
then spark a conversation. But nowadays you have multiple ways of doing that.
Yeah.
So that's um, shifting over a little bit to technology and preservation. How can modern platforms such as podcasts, digital media, aid in preservation of these traditions? We kind of talked a little bit about this, but also uh, what risks, opportunities in digitizing and sharing oral traditions online. I know some communities may not be so key for that. It's like, oh, it's kept just traditionally. It's a whatever it may be, whether it's like, no, we don't do technology, or it might be seen as like a form of erasure in a way. Um, so yeah, so how can creators ensure that these stories are shared ethically and respectfully in digital spaces? I guess I ask.
Yeah. So I feel like just honoring the ownership and contribution that um that person is making. So acknowledging the origin of their stories and just respecting cultural protocols as well. So this question just made me think about um how we're kind of trying to find this balance between social media and just these in-person interactions. I know the older generation might be reluctant to post this information online. Um, but I feel like there's been some warming up by elders to because to get to the youth, I feel like there should be some form of online um interaction, whether it be a podcast or they're always on their phones. If you want to catch their attention, or I would say us, I'm part of that generation. If you want to catch their attention, it has to be online, if not in person. And I've seen Uncle Lino Olapai, which he's also a or was a navigator. Um, he did a podcast episode on the Humanities Council on YouTube. And I never really thought of him being in that kind of space, but it was very useful. I mean, I'm not able to fly home, or I don't know I didn't know his phone number. I can't just call and be like, hey, now what do you know about this? So having that information at my fingertips is very useful. And he has passed now. So just looking back at that and um yeah, having that at your like just at arm's reach is really helpful in remembering them as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's beautiful. One of the things we talked about earlier was a cultural resurgence, or sometimes you hear about it in the media. How do you find that oral traditions contribute to that process? And what gives you hope when you look at how younger generations, such as yourself, are engaging with these traditions?
Yeah, I feel like it reinforces our identity and it strengthens these intergenerational bonds. It also inspires some pride in the cultural heritage. So again, remembering who we are and where we come from. Personally, I feel a lot of pride when I'm reminded of that. Um, so yeah, I feel like it really aids in this cultural resurgence. It provides a living framework for like activism and community building, where the culture can really flourish again. Times are changing, and we're adapting to these new ways of living. So, yeah, just continuing these traditions, even if it may be in different ways, as long as we are making an effort to continue them, I think is really important.
Any guidance for institutions to have better support for Indigenous knowledge systems without co-opting them?
Yes, I believe that Indigenous communities should be the ones leading how their knowledge is documented, um, or taught, shared. So they can provide platforms or resources instead of dictating what content they should or should not release. Um, what else? They
I think
should.
one of the hurdles I've observed, and
Mhm.
I love during this conversation, you've been really conscientious to honor the space of your kumu and naming them, and I think it's very unique to like Hawaii to have professors at a university who are of indigenous background, but doesn't happen everywhere. Yes, it's in different spaces around the nation, maybe around the world, um, but there's certain in order for your faculty to be where they are, they needed to go through the um, the hurdles of the Western context of getting their bachelor's, getting their master's, getting their PhD, getting a job, getting going through tenure. So many times they are scholars in their field, but then there's also the area of like practitioners, you know, and many times practitioners, especially older generations, they didn't have accessibility to that education. And so, unless they're invited as like a guest speaker in the class, they would never be able to, because the university requires you to have like a certain degree to be able to teach. So, yeah, just wondering if there's any insights into how you've seen that navigated, or Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I just, as Indigenous people in academia, um, I feel like there's a big sense of responsibility that you have towards your people because you are representing them. Um, and just I really appreciate my political science faculty and the Indigenous politics as well. They really helped me understand kind of the outlines of how to navigate this this world in an Indigenous perspective and just emphasizing your roots. But sorry, I'm kind of getting off point. Oh, so um, yeah, so some elders, let's say Indigenous people, any of age, um, are not able to have this voice on some of these platforms. Like you said, a lot of them have a platform by working towards um, a degree or going on a podcast. And a lot of Indigenous people don't have the experience or the knowledge to um, make these steps. But
Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you for providing that context. I appreciate that. So just wanted to reflect upon what's been kind of stated before we close out. I do appreciate you bringing this new perspective into the limelight of oral traditions and how important that is. And for listeners, who may not come from Indigenous backgrounds, uh, what they can, I think it's important to reflect upon your own oral traditions of your family. I always think like for anyone who states they don't come from Indigenous background, you do at some point. I think if you and maybe if you're not able to research far back enough, uh, you're able to see there is some history back there. Maybe it goes back 200, 300 years back. But I think also just listening to the stories, oral traditions, or oral stories from your own family that's been passed down. I think that's a great way to kind of just keep things together, even if you've just grown up in this one neighborhood and so do your parents. Like there's a community there, there's stories there. So I was just gonna just one of my last questions. If there's one takeaway you hope listeners leave with, what would it be? And also, is there a story, proverb, teaching from any oral tradition that has stayed with you and continued to guide your work?
yes, I just wanted to leave with a quote from Uncle Malpiailuk, the master navigator from the Caroline Islands, or Satawal in Caroline Islands. So it says, I have laid the stick that connects people together. Now it's up to you, your generation, and the generations to come to build upon that stick a bridge that will ensure the free sharing of information and teaching between the two peoples until the day we become united again as a single people, as we once were, before men separated us with their imaginary political boundaries of today's Polynesia and Micronesia.
Thank you. Thank you so much for
Yes.
that. Well, Bella, just want to thank you so much for being with us today, sharing your insights in such a meaningful way. The conversation is just an opportunity to remind us um, to that storytelling is only a way of preserving the past, or written history, but storytelling is another way that's also just so much alive. And so I do encourage folks to kind of next time someone shares a story, just spend a little extra time listening to them. I think, but
Ask questions.
yes, ask questions. They'll love it. Curiosity is key, and then especially you keep hearing the same story, I find that sometimes you're like, oh, I could tell you the story and update it with my own perspective about it. But
Exactly.
it's definitely,
Transmission.
yes, it's a living
Mhm.
practice of resistance, resilience, cultural resurgence. Oral traditions continue to shape identity, sustain community, and help imagine more just and connected futures. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. We invite you to reflect on the stories that have shaped you, and how to and to consider how you can listen more deeply and support the voices and traditions of Indigenous communities. So until next time, let's continue to build, continue building understanding and connection, one story at a time. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.